In December of 1923, two unlikely travelers arrived in Darjeeling, India, intent on finding what could not possibly exist, Shamballa, a kingdom located inside a hollow earth. Along them trailed Soviet spies, Western occultists, and Mongolian rebels, all serving their own agendas. Even with so many eyes on them, their expedition still managed to disappear from the face of the earth for months. When they finally emerged, they had a fascinating story to tell and even more secrets to hide. The travelers were Nicholas and Helena Roerich, two Russian expatriates traveling under AU.S flag, which they had hoisted upon a Mongolian spear. As they informed the local authorities in Darjeeling, they were leading a scientific archaeological expedition aimed at cataloging the art and culture of Central Asia for the first time. Their eccentric behavior quickly raised some eyebrows. Nicholas Roerich, a famed painter and archaeologist, walked around Darjeeling in the robes of a Dalai Lama, held conspiratorial meetings with Tibetan lamas, and introduced himself as an American, even though his accent betrayed his Russian heritage. Still, the couple's reputation as paragons of the Western art world, as well as their American sponsors, persuaded the authorities to let them pass through the city and into the forbidden Tibetan plateau. However, nobody was aware of the couple's true destination, the city of Shamballa, a place not to be found in any map. Shamballa is a fabled city kingdom of the Himalayas, believed by Buddhists, Hindus, and local shamans to exist simultaneously on the physical and the spiritual plane. For millennia, the legend of the underground kingdom played an important role in every Tibetan tradition, and eventually, rumors of its existence reached the West. It so happened that Helena Roerich, a writer and philosopher, had translated in Russian The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky's influential esoteric work, which first presented Shamballa as a shortcut to enlightenment. The Roerichs came to believe deeply in the Shamballa myth, and at some point, while living in New York, Helena received telepathic instructions from Master Morya, an otherworldly entity, encouraging the couple to leave the US and seek the city for themselves. Unfortunately for the Roerichs, the area they aimed to investigate was all but inaccessible in the early 20th century. Tibet was closed to foreigners. Moreover, the Soviets, the French, the English, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Mongolians, and the Germans vied for control of the place. Spies, rebels, and rogue warlords clashed daily in the mountain passes, making the expedition extremely hazardous. The rivalry between the USSR and the British Empire in particular was so intense it was nicknamed the Great Game. However, it seems that upon arriving in Darjeeling, the Roerichs had already managed to turn the hardships of the Great Game into an advantage by offering themselves as pawns. After receiving permission from the Indian authorities, the Roerichs set out from Darjeeling towards the colorful monasteries of Sikkim, and then proceeded into the mainland. The couple's eldest son, George, a noted Tibetologist, polyglot, and student of military tactics, was in charge of the group's safety, not a small task, since the expedition was meant to last for years and cross 25,000 kilometers of previously uncharted roads. The Roerichs knew they would encounter scurvy, extreme weather, bandit groups, and blocked mountain passages ahead. Given the enormity of the task, the fact that they chose to make an unexpected detour through Moscow in 1926 was bound to raise questions. Why would the Roerichs cross into Russia, adding hardship to an already impossible trail? The most likely answer is that they were fulfilling a deal with their true sponsors in the quest for Shamballa, namely, the Soviet secret police. What sounds like the plot of a particularly imaginative novel has been extensively supported by scholars of modern Russia and early 20th century history. According to independent research by Richard Spence, Marcus Osterrieder, and Andrzej Znamensky, several other world governments, China, Mongolia, Japan, Great Britain, took an interest in the hidden city, too. One of the reasons was an ancient Mongolian Tibetan prophecy which, in the explosive political climate of the early 20th century, sounded convincing enough to turn some heads. The prophecy declared that as materialism spread, humanity would eventually deteriorate. The people of the earth would be united under an evil king, who would soon attack Shamballa with fearful weapons. In time, the 32nd ruler of Shamballa would triumph over the bad king and usher in a new era of peace and harmony. What today might sound like a standard doomsday prophecy could have had great implications back then, when borders constantly shifted and even great powers needed the support of local warlords. The Chinese and Russian governments in particular knew that among the peoples of Central Asia, belief in the kingdom of Shamballa was strong. Whoever managed to identify themselves with the forces of good would gain the support of the surrounding peoples and thus gain control of the area. Once this was understood, several states became very interested in unearthing the underground kingdom. Most of the officials intended to use Shamballa's discovery for propaganda purposes, but some genuinely believed that they could also gain access to the hidden kingdom's mystical weapons. One powerful man who truly believed in the prophecy was Gleb Boki, a leader of the Cheka, the USSR's secret police. Boki genuinely thought that the hidden city would offer him access to advanced weapons and mind-controlling techniques, and managed to convince his superiors that the quest was worth looking into. The newly established USSR was receptive to the idea, even if there was no mystic armory to be found. If they managed to identify themselves with the hidden kingdom, they could enlist the help of Buddhists and nationalists in Mongolia and Tibet, thus strengthening their position in Central Asia. At the very least, an expedition to search for Shamballa could spy on British activity in the area. However, Boki was unable to secure funds for the mission due to internal rivalries at the Cheka, scholars Andrzej Znamensky and Ernst von Waldenfels assert, and so he sought a roundabout solution, allying with Nicholas and Helena Roerich, celebrated scholars and Russian expatriates, who were famously planning their own expedition to the area, under a US banner. The Roerichs were not really political. They had conveniently left their native Russia just before the Communist Revolution and viewed the Reds with great distrust. However, when searching for a hidden underground kingdom, one needs all the help they can get. Thankfully, Helena Roerich's otherworldly pen pal Master Morya informed her that business needed to be done with the Bolsheviks in the interest of the world's spiritual advancement. After receiving this mystical message, Helena wrote in her diary, "Lenin is with us." It is very likely that Nicholas Roerich met with Shishirin, Soviet Secretary for Foreign Affairs, and Mir Trilesser, head of espionage, in Paris. There, the Soviets agreed to provide the couple with considerable financial and logistical help in exchange for information on the movements of the French and British spies in the area. Gleb Boki's team, of course, had much higher expectations than espionage. They expected to get the ancient wisdom of the city itself. Since the Roerichs were not trained spies, something of their true purpose leaked out while they waited in Darjeeling. Nicholas openly spoke of establishing in Central Asia the Sacred Union of the East, a spiritual commonwealth uniting traditions of the area into a single state under the Bolsheviks' protection. Several lamas found his cause worthwhile and flocked to him, which alerted other power groups in the area. It has even been suggested by historian Richard Spence that in Darjeeling, the British contacted the Roerichs and made them a counteroffer, or simply threatened their lives should they continue. In any case, the Roerich expedition began its trek closely monitored by the British, the USSR, and the Americans, as well as the Japanese, the Mongolians, and the Chinese. In search of Shamballa, they would go through 35 mountain passes, cross the Gobi Desert, and chart tens of alpine peaks for the first time. But from the beginning, they were beset with extreme weather, local rebel groups, armed bandits, poison grass which took their horses down, and caravan looters they could not avoid. The couple's travel diaries, along with Nicholas' extraordinary paintings, provide a picture of the wonder and fear the travelers must have felt when crossing the terra incognita of the Himalayas. Is the heart of Asia beating? Or has it suffocated by the sand? Nicholas wondered as the expedition crossed Taklamakan Desert. As they moved on, though, towards what they believed to be the hidden city, the trek became harder. The road was littered with animal skeletons, donkeys, mules, and yaks. The expedition suffered from mountain blindness, food was sparse, and the US flag was not enough to discourage attacks. The Roerichs remained optimistic. Nicholas was capable of finding beauty even in the blinding snowstorms, which almost cost them their lives in the Karakoram mountain passages. So how close did the Roerichs and Bikii get to their true purpose? It is said that the closer one approaches to the hidden, hollow earth city, the more vague their writings become, because Shamballa cannot be described in mere words. In his esoteric book Shamballa the Resplendent, which he was writing along with his more scientific and much drier travel diary, Nicholas began charting another, parallel journey written in stories and riddles. As the expedition went deeper, he increasingly recorded strange manifestations, fires, lights and visions over their camp, though those were mostly left out of his scientifically minded travel diary. His paintings also became more esoteric, increasingly depicting the messianic king of Shamballa. It is very likely that communication with the Soviets broke down at this point, after the country refused to provide more help to the Roerichs after the couple's first visit to Moscow in 1926. After the Soviets withdrew their support, the strangest part of the entire journey came to pass. In the summer of 1927, the expedition, still watched over by most major powers of the era, managed to disappear from the eyes of the world for an entire year. Communication was lost, and the Roerichs were considered dead. Our only source for this invisible year is Nicholas' travel diary, which contradicts his Shamballa the Resplendent narration, and speaks of violent conflict with the Tibetan armed forces. The only thing that is certain is that the last 5 months of their disappearance were spent in the Tibetan government's detainment camp, where, due to the harsh conditions, 5 members of the expedition died. After that, the Roerichs and their son trekked back to India. The closest they had gotten to Shamballa, according to Nicholas' travel diaries, was in the Altai Mountains, in the Valley of Yumen, when an old believer proudly showed them the entrance to the subterranean kingdom, now barred with stones. The true denizens of Shamballa would return, he assured the Roerichs, in the glorious time of human purification. Till then, the rest of humanity would only hear the echoes of their chanting. Roerich used the opportunity to keep searching for Shamballa, this time touting American leaders as the messianic figures soon to lead the war against evil, which was now represented by the Bolsheviks. During the 1927 expedition to Central Asia, the Russian painter and explorer Nicholas Roerich moved towards the Gobi Desert, in Mongolia, crossing the Khaidam, Sidam, salt marsh. Traditions reported by Madame Blavatsky and George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, as well as the tales of local folklore, said it was the site of an ancient sea, within which it was handed down that advanced civilizations, now forgotten, and legendary cities, now buried by sands, had developed. The expedition's route crossed Sikkim, Kashmir, Ladakh, China, Xinjiang, Altai, Mongolia, and Tibet. Why was that route chosen? As for the scientific and cultural purposes, the answer comes when studying not only the route taken by the expedition, but also Roerich's historical views. The Roerichs were theosophists. Helena, with the collaboration of Nicholas, translated The Secret Doctrine in Russian, originally written in English. In the introductory part to The Secret Doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky, precise information is provided regarding ancient civilizations that flourished around the Taklamakan Depression part of the Gobi Desert, which was once a fertile region. A Russian explorer, the General Przewalski, in 1873 he made an account of his discoveries in the Taklamakan Desert. He found at the oasis of Sherchin naturally dehydrated bodies of Western men and women. Przewalski also heard legends about 23 other cities buried for centuries under the desert sands. The story of the Russian explorer Przewalski regarding Western mummies did not have an echo in the scientific field. His discoveries would have ended up in oblivion if H.P. Blavatsky in the 19th century had not reported them in the preface of The Secret Doctrine. It is well known that time is a gentleman who gives everyone back to him, but 100 years had to pass, waiting for 1978 with the official discovery of mummies with Western somatic characteristics by Chinese archaeologists. Regarding the journey to the gates of Shamballa, other information regarding the location of Shamballa with the Gobi Desert can be found in the writings of H.P. Blavatsky. For Nicholas Roerich, the hidden place Shamballa had an exact geographical position. Certain indications, hidden by the symbols, indicated the site of Shamballa in the Pamir, Turkestan and Gobi. However, let's not forget that the Kyrgyz people of the Kuan-Luan Mountains also live in huts and take care of cattle breeding. These places, according to N. Roerich, were mentioned because near Shamballa people lived in huts and engaged in cattle breeding. The Kuan-Luan was mentioned by Roerich more than once in relation to those places of orientation that referred to the hidden country. This ridge was also featured in the legends of the men of ancient faith. They spoke of pilgrimage in search of Belavodi. This route, geographically deciphered by Roerich, was part of that of the expedition to Central Asia. Why was that itinerary chosen? On the stretch of Sikkim there were ancient monasteries. N. Roerich met lamas, had long conversations with their priors. The legends originated from the sacred Kanchenjunga, known as the Mountain of the Five Treasures. An unknown reality lay behind these legends. The Russian painter was in contact with this reality and reflected it in the canvases painted in Sikkim. Reality itself resembled legend. The final itinerary of the expedition to Central Asia was drawn up there, in Sikkim. N. Roerich was interested in finding traces of the migratory paths of ancient peoples from west to east and vice versa through the mounds, cave paintings, and more. He wanted to be the first Westerner to paint and document the vast mountain ranges of India, Tibet, and Central Asia and seek to discover treasures long hidden by the desert sands. It is understandable why the route of Roerich's first great expedition to Central Asia draws a noose, a ring, around the desert or former Gobi Sea, exploring the mountains that surround the desert. The secrets of the Gobi Desert. The tundras of the north and the Gobi Desert hide treasures, but would it be well done to hurry to reveal them? Only a high level of consciousness would be able to deal with such precious values. Knowing the spiral of evolution, no diamonds are thrown under the chariot wheels. Where there are now only salt lakes and the desolate deserts of the Gobi, Taklamakan, Sidam and Zangaria, there was a vast inland sea that stretched over Central Asia. This sea remained until the last great glacial period, when about 12,000 years ago a local cataclysm swept away the waters in the south and west, forming a large and isolated desert, leaving an oasis, with a lake and an island in the center. The Sahara Desert was formed in the same way, at first an open sea, then it became a lake and finally it dried up leaving only the sands. In this sea, there was a splendid white island, Shvetadvipa, above which the city of Shamballa was built, which for its beauty was unrivaled in the world, was inhabited by the last remnants of the race that preceded our, mystically called the Sons of the Mist of Fire. The island in the Gobi Sea with its remains of a splendid civilization still exists today as an oasis surrounded by sands that have not been trampled by human feet. Communications with the White Island, H.P. Blavatsky informs us, they were done through underground passages, which communicated in all directions. The island is now covered by the sands of the Gobi. The sands of the Gobi Desert move continuously pushed by terrible gusts of wind that blow continuously. The legends, the local traditions tell that in the distant past there was the seat of one of the richest empires in the world. Marco Polo, in describing the Gobi Desert, he wrote that there were sounds, sometimes songs and sometimes moans that inspired terror in travelers. In any case, the sands of the Gobi Desert are also known as sands that sing, a natural phenomenon for scientists. The location of Shamballa in the Gobi Desert, described by H.P. Blavatsky, is not surprising, as the Mongols, including the Buryats of Siberia and the Kalmyks of the lower Volga region, were strong followers of Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the teachings of the Kalachakra. For many centuries, Mongols around the world have believed that Mongolia is the land north of Shamballa. N. Roerich in 1935 painted what he saw in the Gobi Desert, in Mongolia, in front of small menhirs, a stone sculpture, which depicts a guardian, with a goblet decorated with fire placed in his left hand. N. Roerich admitted that at times a chalice was a symbol of fire, and could not be connected with the concept of a burial ritual. The chalice is connected to the Grail and to the stone of heaven Sintamana Theraphor, The sculpture of the guardian with the chalice is an indication and a warning. You are in a protected sacred place. Roerich bore witness with his paintings every time he was in front of a work of art, because he was aware that what he had admired one day was no longer possible for the destructive work of men. The destruction of the huge statues in Bamiyan by the Taliban fanatics sadly confirms the fears of Roerich. That a priceless statue can be destroyed by a fanatic, or a monument by an ignorant, in all this there is an abysmal ferocity. Leaving a precious monument in the desert, we often asked the guide, "Will it be safe?" And, wise in experience, he shook his head, "It may be beasts, but hardly people." Tradition has it that great riches, statues, weapons, and artistic objects are hidden under the sands. None of the locals dares to touch the treasure, as it is said to be under a powerful spell. The discovery would be paid for with death. Cruel spirits named Body guard the places until the prescribed time for their rediscovery. These places, says Ms. Blavatsky, are jealously guarded against any foreign intrusion. Marco Polo calls the Gobi Desert the Lop Desert, near the city of Lop, today Charklik, near the salt lake of Lop Nur, or the Great Desert. Marco Polo tells us that it takes a year to cross it. Food and water are very scarce, and you risk getting lost due to hallucinations and deceptive evil spirits. He wrote that. It is an established and recognized fact that this desert hosts many evil presences, which push travelers to destruction with the most extraordinary illusions. These spirits, or jinn, sometimes they fill the air with the sounds of all kinds of musical instruments, and also of drums and the roar of weapons. When the man rides at night through the desert, this happens that if someone stays behind their companions to sleep, or on the other hand, when he then wants to join them, he hears talking spirits in the air who resemble his companions, and often hears himself called by his proper name, and is sometimes misled so that he will never be found again, and many have already been lost in this way. Gurdjieff, in 1898, after visiting the mystical community of Sarmung, located on the highlands of the Pamir where the Oxus River rises, he decided to explore the Gobi Desert. He didn't say what he discovered in the sands. He wrote that his group had devised a system to see what the windswept sands hid. We asked them many questions, and they revealed all kinds of beliefs regarding the Gobi Desert. In most of the stories it was stated that under the sands of the present desert villages and even entire cities were buried, with countless treasures and riches belonging to peoples who had inhabited the once prosperous region. The place where these riches were, it was said, was known by some men of the neighboring villages, was a secret that was handed down from father to son, under the bond of the oath, and anyone who violated this oath had to suffer a special punishment, which many had experienced. More than once there was an allusion to a certain region of the desert, where a large city was buried. Roerich, in 1927, during his expedition to Central Asia, returning from Mongolia, crossed the Gobi Desert. On his way to the Tibetan plateau he arrived Inarid Kaidam or Tsaidam Basin, bordered between the Altan Taf Mountains that separate it from Taklamakan and the Kuan Luan Mountains that separate it from the Tibetan Plateau. Who remembers the splendid lords of Atlantis now? Only at the swamps of Tsaidam can images of the radiant cities of that time still be seen. Kaidam, Tsaidam, Mongolian name meaning salt marsh, a quarter of the basin is, in fact, covered by lakes and by soft salt coasts, dangerous because it is easy to sink. Kaidam is also home to Lake Karhan, which contains 60 billion tons of salt. Roerich in 1929 painted the Kaidam swamps, and the places seem to be those of recent discoveries in the Tsaidam Desert. In 1996, near the city of Dalinga, near the slopes of Mount Baigong, inside 3 caves, a series of metal tubes embedded in the rock, one of which is 40 centimeters in diameter, were discovered. To accentuate the mystery of the place, there is one at the foot of the hill expanse of stones that resemble menhirs and to those ancient burials that Roerich perpetuated in the painting Karaksuri. The Gobi Desert was once a sea, around which civilizations flourished and thrived. At the end of the 19th century, H.P. Blavatsky, in the preface of The Secret Doctrine, wrote that the now desolate and waterless regions of the Darim, a true desert in the heart of Turkestan, were formerly covered by rich and flourishing cities. The gigantic continuous wall of mountains that surrounds the whole plateau of Tibet, from the upper reaches of the Quan Ki River in the hills of the Karakoram, has seen a civilization spanning millennia that could tell strange secrets to mankind. The eastern and western parts of these regions, the Nanshan and the Altantaf, were once covered with cities that might have rivaled Babylon. An entire geological period has passed on that land since those cities disappeared, as evidenced by the mounds of quicksand and the now barren and dead soil of the immense central plains of the Darim Basin. Within these sand plateaus there is water and fresh and flourishing oases, some completely inaccessible. Built deep in the bowels of the earth, the underground warehouses are safe, and as their entrances are hidden, there is no danger of them being discovered, even if numerous armies should invade the sandy deserts. So deep was his devotion to the memory of H.P. Blavatsky that N. Roerich painted the messenger dedicated to her in 1925 and personally brought it to Udyar, the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society. Helena Roerich states that H.P. Blavatsky was a messenger of the White Brotherhood of Shamballa. H.P. Blavatsky was undoubtedly an ardent messenger of the White Brotherhood, and it is absolutely certain that she brought reliable knowledge. Certainly of all theosophists, only Blavatsky had the privilege of receiving the teaching directly from the great masters in one of their ashrams in Tibet. She was the great spirit who accepted the bitter task of transmitting to humanity, lost in dead dogmas and on the path of atheism, the impulse to study the great sacred doctrine of the East. In fact, only through H.P. Blavatsky was it possible to approach the White Brotherhood, because she was the link to the hierarchical chain. The Orientalist scholar David Rigel shows that for H.P. Blavatsky the teaching instructors were indeed affiliated Vajrayana Buddhism, and the Kalachakratantra were also affiliated with a more secret tradition, not limited to Tibet or Buddhism alone. The metaphysics present in the secret doctrine by H.P. Blavatsky and his teachers do not belong to the Gelugpa school of the Yellow Caps, school to which both the Dalai and the Panchen Lama belong. A closer affinity with the Janangpa school, and with smaller traditional persecuted groups, has been suggested. Yet the origins of H.P. Blavatsky's teaching are not in Tibet, or at least, not in the Tibetan language. It will be remembered that most of the Tibetan scriptures were translated from Sanskrit. The original source may be in a different language, which H.P. Blavatsky calls without. The works continued by the Roerichs. They both worked to create a bridge between East and West and to affirm a research methodology that we can now define as holistic. As for Shambhala, it still awaits the next explorer, hidden inside a hollow earth.